Welcome to Lesson 7, the cart tutorial. We are making a directory for our routes. This is where we keep our API folders. We're going to have items and purchase logs as our API kind of endpoints. We're going to walk through an entire CRUD system with create, update, read, and delete. And that's going to be for the items. And then we're not going to do quite as much. We don't need to do quite as much for the logging. But we'll go ahead and start this out in our server file. And let's build the API route paths to the folders we just created, where our files, our API files will reside. And these paths are going to be really important later on when we do the client side. So we'll be back and forth copying and pasting these. They have to be precise, obviously, for our paths. And once we get this all together, we will be taking out the local storage going on and what I consider the prototype, because it's not really set up with any database yet. So we're going to turn this into an actual non-prototype working application with a server side. And we'll be using the MySQL Workbench to do a MySQL database. Let's go ahead and start writing out our items, API endpoints. Looks like we got a misspelling. I'll have to come back here and fix that later. It looks towards the end. I'll remember that if I want to remember. It's always good for me to write down if it's server side or client side. The reason being, they're really close in their operations and their process. It's easy for me to confuse them if I'm just looking fast up, and sometimes I'll notice that I'm writing on the wrong one. So if I write the server side and then the next one will be client side, it's less likely I'll make that human error. And similar to what we have with our user functions, this is going to go through the exact same process. Not nearly as complicated, though, because we're not trying to encrypt anything like a password here. Here we're just going to do our check token, which is already going to be done anyway. So we've got that functionality built in. We just write in check token and we're good to go. Here's where we're going to put in our SQL command. And this is also, it's interesting. We're writing on the items file, but this is the purchase log. So it looks like I'll write it all out here eventually, and then we'll move it on over to the purchase log, because the time frame in particular is going to be what we're looking for within the purchase log. As you can see, the sale ID within the purchase log has a date on it, and so we're using where sales ID like, and we have a time frame. So if our time frame, whether it be the year, the month, the day, or the hour, matches, then we're going to bring out that window of time. So it's a real easy way to just kind of get a portion of that timestamp. And we'll just send out the results in JSON, and that'll be it. Okay, so let's go ahead and do something similar, but this time instead of get, we're doing a post. And this would be when the user is going through and they agree to make a purchase on the cart. Now, an interesting thing about how these are made, I don't do a huge purchase of all the items at once. The purchases actually goes through a loop on the client side. It goes through a for loop through every item individually in the cart and sends it off one by one to the server side. You are going to have major problems otherwise. It's a lot easier to just do one at a time. And then you also keep in mind though, you will be able to identify which ones were purchased at the same time, because they'll all have the same timestamp. So even though they're individually saved, each item that was purchased, they'll share something in common. And so you can still figure out, let's say someone came in and bought 3 items, all items will be identified in one sale, even though they were posted. It took 3 posts to get those 3 items in. So here, since we're sending it in an object, as opposed to sending it over like parameters, I'm basically going to be saying rec body dot and then whatever it be, sale ID, item names, and so on and so forth. There's the 2 different ways. Well, there's more than 2, but usually there's this, or it would be over something called rec params. But this one in particular, we're sending the body, so it's fine. We're sending a whole object. Okay, and just in case there's an error, obviously, we'll go ahead and set up a little bit of details so we can act accordingly on the client side. Okay, let's go ahead and work on our tables within MySQL Workbench. Let's open the database, and I'm going to add some tables. It's super easy to name the table here. This one is purchaseLog. And we'll just start typing. We'll start making what we'd like to be the sale ID. It's going to be a string, 255 character max, can't be null. It's the primary key, which is currently going to be changed because, like I said, we're making a lot of purchases, and each item that was purchased in a group will have the same sale ID, so we will be changing that. That won't work. You cannot have a duplicate, and that'll come up here in a little while. We'll just go ahead and get the rest of the information for our table. I'm just looking at another table to get some references here. Okay, so let's go back. Now, when it comes to doing some kind of numeric number that's like a unit of cost, this is how you're going to do it, because it's going to be coming in like $1 and then some change. So this would be representing currency, is decimal 6,2. So 2 would meaning past the decimal on the right, and it's going to expect 6 characters before the decimal on the left. Let's just go ahead, and this is what our items JSON looks like anyway, since we know that from our prototype. So let's just go ahead and make sure that we write that in as well. It's always helpful to have the work done in local storage with your prototype, because then you can just use it as a model to build your table out, because you already have all that information. Everything that worked on your prototype is something you just literally copy. And once again, this is just going to be an integer. It's not currency, so we don't have to have. It's not as complicated as the last one. Category is just going to be a string as well. And switch it up to 55 character max. So it'll send an error otherwise, so keep that in mind. You can change that if you don't like it. Now the details is a 500 character max as well. Okay, let's work on the items API. Yeah, it looks like I've fixed it up, but this is the items page, items.js, and we once again are introducing Express, bringing in the router. The database, obviously we need to have a connection with that. All the passwords and credentials will be affiliated with DB. And we know check token is just going to be verifying every time we have a change or a request. And just one more thing we didn't do. within the items, we need to actually also put a price here as well. And everybody knows this is going to be a currency, so decimal 6,2. Let's save this. Okay, now we're back in business. All right, so when we open up, there's many places that we're going to need to have our items list. So as we log in, that needs to be downloaded immediately. And it can't be something we saved from the last session, because they might have added more items. So we have to get it fresh every time when the user loads up and logs in. So it's a really standard, it's not very specific. It's going to call in for just this one table. We're going to ask for everything. And this is going to be something that happens when we log in. So it's going to fire off immediately. And if without this working, nothing else is going to work. No cart, no inventory. And we won't be able to work the analytics without this list up. So and you can see the same fashion that it was when we were doing our login and log out sessions. And we're all familiar with this. We're going to do a post here when we make a new item from our inventory CMS, a content management system page. I'm trying to put the SQL commands in as caps to recognize which one is which. And you can see variables and whatnot are not going to be, they're just going to be whatever they are, they're not going to have to be caps. It just makes it more legible for me. Items is definitely going to be lowercase. All right, let's walk through our object. This is what we'll be expecting that will be sent from the client side. It's very specific. So in a little while, you'll notice how I'll actually copy this and bring it over so I can follow how we wrote this one. Okay, so that object's ready. Now we have to put in case of an error as well. We have to still send some information as to what happened. There we go. Now let's do the update portion of our CRUD system. Update's going to be a put here. I'm going to make up something that we can have relevant for our path. And these are our two arguments coming in. And your SQL statement for the folder items, or table items. And this is actually a lengthy statement as compared to the other ones. This can be rather large. We just want to go through each item and let it know that this item in particular we're talking about that has this name needs to equal what we've sent. So you basically can't delete, or you can't update a name. You're just going to have to delete that item and write it again. Now, we could write it another way. It just would get confusing. So ultimately, if you've messed up bad enough to where the name is, because that's how we identify the item, if the name's wrong, just start over. There's not too much about it. So this is how we'll verify what you're talking about. So item name equals, it would be where item name equals. It's pretty straightforward. And here you can see I tried to do change item name, but I wasn't having it. The reason being because I would send item name, it has to be the same one so it can identify itself. So you can't send a new one, because then you wouldn't be able to identify it, and nothing would happen. Now, the way around that would be if you wanted to start using the UUID that we have installed, and you could have unique user IDs for the item, and that's how they get identified, and that would solve your problem if you wanted to update, starting doing your title updates. So you'd have to switch their identifiable value. All right, let's do the simple delete, and this is typically the last of the things on the list. Now delete here, once again, I just need to know the item name. With an update, we actually sent quite a bit of information. This is just the name and a parameter. So as opposed to saying rec body item name, it's going to say rec param item name in reference to parameters. Now, make sure it's capitalized. Check all your spelling. Now we're going to make the call out to the database, send it our SQL query, listen for an error. Now, if we're good, no errors, we send our result. Now we need to export all this so that the file can be found on the server. Okay, now we're going to integrate from Lesson 5. All these files from Lesson 5 need to come into our work right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our terminal, and I'm going to go ahead and build out all these files blank. And then we'll go through and we'll paste them in from Lesson 5. And then we'll start the integration process. That's what's great about this this framework, this login framework. You can just basically plug in anything you've built, and then it just starts, this thing's set up for it already. So let's get Lesson 5 cart copied, pasted, CMS file, same thing. And the item selector. We're going to need the purchase log. Time selector, of course. Paste it in. Now we need to merge the validation and the nav because we have them on both. So the validation, if you can remember, we check for currency on a little bit of the fields here. So I'm going to put that into our validation, which otherwise looks the same. So now it's identical to the other one. Now, when the nav, these are our items in our nav. They're built the same way that our current one is now. We just need to get our nav to match. Take out the current one because we don't care about main content anymore. It doesn't have anything on it other than a title. So now that we've put in the nav from Lesson 5, let's move on. and take main content out, like I said, because we're not using it anymore. It was just a titling placeholder. We're going to have to go ahead and import these just like everything else. So let's go back to app and make sure that we get those in there. We're going to have to bring in all the hooks. So that, and we'll be bringing in all the functions as well. I'm just put a little note. There we go. There's our hooks. Let's get rid of that because we're going to have an actual email coming in. We'll replace everything. User email is going to be replacing that. So let's go ahead and get the date. This is the time search function. Let's go ahead and apply that to our app here. So I just pasted that in. Let's find everywhere that user is put together. Hold on, we need to actually put in the modules. So where active module was, or main content, we need to go ahead and put in these are our modules from lesson 5. You see how I have user, that needs to be user email everywhere. So now that we've put it in, we need to go to each one of these files, find out where it says user, and switch it to user email, because that's what our login has been using for that value. Now we could probably start this thing up and see what our client side server is doing. Let's take out man content. We don't use that anymore. Obviously, we need to import all these. So let's get back to our app and import them like normal. Looks like we're getting closer. You need to export this, remember. Make sure you export. I need a new file. I forgot to put in this. So the purchasing chart is our analytics. It's looking for that. Let's go back and get that from our cart tutorial 5 lesson. So I just forgot one page. No big deal. Pasting it in, moving on. All right, let's install the dependencies for the charts. Just like we did in lesson 5, just going to have to do this again. All right, let's get this started up again. Can we log in? Looks like we're logged in. There's the cart, there's the transaction log, inventory, and analytics. So the nav is working, everything's plugged in. Let's make it look a little prettier. Let's bring in the CSS from lesson 5, stuff we've already got for all the components we built. All right, if we already have duplicates, let's get rid of the duplicates. Now we've merged our CSS. Lesson 5 and 6 are now merged on CSS. Now, what we need to do, since we were working with prototype before, is we need to take out all the local storage functionality within the client side and start using these API calls to the server. They will be gathering up and sending us our data as opposed to us storing it locally. So with this, we're going to be using Axios, obviously. We're going to have to do a little bit of changing up on how things are obtained, like as far as the items in the purchase log. So I'll be basically deleting a lot of the local storage functionality, in fact all of it, as far as the purchase log and the items. Okay, so we got the path. This is the path we're going to be sending it to. This is the starting of it, and we need to get the name of it from the actual file. So initially I kind of gathered the idea of what I want to do, and I kind of gamble with, do I want this to stay in local storage initially? Because one thing, there's a couple choices you can do. You can download it, and instead of sharing it in and out of modules just like React is intended for, a lot of times, as long as it's not sensitive information, you can put it in local storage. And then each item module can grab it from there in local storage, and it'll work typically fine, sometimes better. However, this is an idea I played with here in these few minutes, and then I take it out because I've decided why. Why not? Because I need to have these things update in real time, all the time. And if I put it in local storage, sometimes it might take, that's one extra step as opposed to passing it down. So therefore, I decide not to do it. And I'll take these local storage functionality pieces out here in a second. Now when I call grab all items, this is when the fun starts. And keep in mind, right now we're currently on the CMS page, and this is going to be better held out on the app, so I eventually move this. Now here would be the items as a state. It's an object that we're going to go ahead and set once we make the successful API call. Now when I want to post an item, like I said, it has to be real specific. So all items is exactly what it says. It can't just say items, obviously. It's not the correct path. Post item would be identical over here. Has to be. So the initial API /items and then post item. And pass down config to the content to the CMS page. And then from there, it's got to say props, obviously, because we just passed it through. So props config is going to pass in the check token. I'm going to get rid of that extra slash. Okay, so once that has gotten some kind of response, we're going to go through this. Let's go ahead and do the post. Now when you do an add item, we already have all the things that are going to happen locally built in. So we're going to make this post, but we're really not going to change much going on here. We still all need all these things to happen locally too. So we'll keep up with state here, no problem. And we'll also be sending out like our data to the server. So luckily we'll just do a lot of copying and pasting to accomplish what we had running already in the front end. Here we go. I'm going to make sure the object looks the way it's supposed to. And one thing about this is we got to make sure that this is a number, and we have to make sure that this is a number as well. They'll be expecting it, and we'll get an error if for any reason it's not. So this is our front end, our last chance to verify that we're sending the number out as opposed to a string. Now, keep in mind, we also validated above as well, but so technically you wouldn't have to, but I'm doing it anyway. Now, remember the message that comes back from the results always says of an affected row. If it's 0, that means it's not working for some reason. And then we want to pass down a little bit of information to let them know that didn't work, which would be the message. And then we want to make sure, obviously, this is kind of a red alert, because 1 is affected row would be 1 is what we're looking for. Now keep in mind, this is just going to be an alert for the information that was sent. These things right here are going to be what's going to keep our platform up in orbit. Like locally, we're all still kind of working together here. Like I said, I'm going to come take the local storage down. All right, let's do an update for the item. And within the edit item function we already have currently, we already have the validation prepared. And if it is valid, everything's working out the way we want, we're just going to literally do what we already were doing, wrapped inside of our Axios call. And let's take a look what the path's supposed to look like. It says update item with a capital I. So that's what we're going to be expecting from the server side says. So make sure that that's in here correct. Update item. And we're going to be sending an object. So that's why it says data, and then we'll be having data represented here in a second. So once again, if it's an affected row of 0, it means it didn't work out. Let's go ahead and put our message together. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get all this stuff and put it in there with the else. So everything we had going anyway is going to keep going the way we had it. We just need to make sure that the server's on the same page. Now let's go ahead and build that that data. There we go. Now here's our data, ready to go. Got to spell it right. Make sure that that's passed through correctly. All right, let's go ahead and finish this up for the delete. There's the path we're going to be looking for. And here's how we're going to put that variable value right here. So selected item. Now remember, the interesting thing about our selected item with the name for the select menu, item select, that is, values are in numbers, if you remember from our lessons in the past. So I will have to make sure that we have the list of items, and then I literally use the index of whatever my selected item is, whatever that number is. That has to be, you'll see that won't work. The selected item is a number, and I have to have the index of the items list to be represented. So unfortunately, this delete item was going to send out a number, and the database won't know what it is, and you'll see how I fix it. Okay, here's on our cart, we're going to need to go ahead and make a purchase. This is where our purchase log comes together and gets its data from. We want to make sure, just like all of them, the path is identical. All right, so we've got our sales information ready to go. It's going to send out this object of sale ID, item name, and price. Price is a guaranteed number. We've already verified it. We're going to go ahead and pass through the items sold in our console. So you'll see it'll be multiple items individually sent out. And this is in a for loop. So it's going to for loop through our cart list, and each one of these is going to be a post. And then we'll just coincidentally say what item it was. We need to pass down config to our cart. All right, let's go ahead and get our log, our purchase log. We don't need this stuff anymore. Now we're going to get the actual time we want from our API as opposed to the local storage. All right. It's going to be temp time is what the variable is going to be. And I'm going to go ahead and put in our security. And our response. In case it doesn't work out, we'll leave a message. And if it does work, we're going to go ahead and set our state of time selected. So instead of the database being filled up from the local storage, we're actually filling up from our response. So let's go ahead and do a couple fixes. Looks like I need to add in a category here. Looks like I just forgot it. That's something within our items. They have categories. And then we're going to do that here as well. And we don't have anything in our database, no items yet. So let's type something in. We got our console open down here. Okay, it was added. Affected rows is 1. There it is. So let's check the update. As you can see, let's take a look at our table. There's what we just typed in. Let me just type in a few more things. There we are. As you can see, these are all starting to work. No, that doesn't. It looks like our alert's broken. 0 affected rows, so it clearly didn't work. Yeah, we definitely want to put in our category here. And let's try this again. Affected rows 1, so it looks like that worked. Yeah, okay, we're good now. So let's add a few more items. Okay, so I'll just add a few more things that we have for our tutorials so we can just run through and have items in there. It'll be a rather small store. And let's go ahead and see how our edit works again. Testing a little bit. Yeah, we've got a problem here. There's our problem. It's not showing anything at all. And we'll just go ahead and put the name of it in there as well. And they're not showing us a message, so let's just make one up. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, it seems like it's working now. Yep, edit works fine. Let's go ahead and check the delete and see if that works. Now, one of the things, these items, these input fields will not be available when we're on the delete section, so we need to make sure that on delete we can't show those modules. We can't ask that they exist. So, looks like there's not working right here. Yep, you see how it has a number 3 I sent out? You see, item select is giving numbers. It's an index of the items list. So let's get that number and compare it within the items list. We'll get the number 3 of the items list, item name, and it'll be more specific. As you can see here, we'll try it again. Item test item deleted. So now we're sending out something that the server will know. It knows what test is. Now we do want to make sure that selected index it to 0 so that it'll go back, it'll reset our menu. Just like what we do with clear forms, it has to be selected with the ed at the end. And we're also going to set our info box back to, nothing. We'll close the info box. So we'll just run one more test to make sure that the info box closes and the select menu goes back to the reset. So this was all working good, and we're back to square one with select items, so that's excellent. Okay. Client-side cart testing. Now, there was some trickiness going on because we were still working with local storage and it was still in there. So what we're going to be doing is verifying that local storage is a thing of the past, and it's going to take a few steps. Looks like there's something going on with my purchasing, my post right here. I didn't have it. The connection, the DB connection wasn't in the file correctly. Okay, it's there now. Now, like I said earlier, we need to remember that if we're going to make a purchase, we were setting it up with the sale ID was always the same. We wanted to make sure that we knew which ones were bought together. But that means that you cannot use it as a key within the database because multiple items will share the same timestamp and sale ID. So what I'm going to do is, this is the UUID that I used earlier when I was logging out of our token. I would send one of these UUIDs to replace our token once we logged out. I'm using the exact same function here, and it's going to be our new key, so it can be identifiable uniquely within every time an item's purchased. So there will be a unique ID saved. And I want to say it's a 36 character one, so 46 is fine. So we're going to let it know. You're going to have to be creating a unique ID. Here's where the function lives. And then we're going to add one more field here when we send out our submission in this post. And it's going to have that ID that it generated. Now, obviously, this one I was missing out on the params. I just had time frame, which we wouldn't know what that is. It needs to know what is time frame. It's coming from your params. Okay, purchase was submitted correctly. Let's test out the logging. We want to make sure that everything's spelled correctly. And as you can see, the logging seems to be working. It's on military time, so let's go ahead and check the hours specifically it worked. Let's go test the analytics. So gloves, there we go. There's a t-shirt sold that is working. Just me has been logged in, so as you can see, we're going to have to log in more people to get a comparison of who's selling more. And I'll go ahead and do that right now. Let's make a new user. Let's log the new user in. Let's make some purchases from the cart. Now we're going to go see all those purchases. There we go. So now you can differentiate between the users. And here we are. Excellent. So now you can see the comparison of who's selling. On the right, there's only one dot because we're only counting one day. So when I count more days, you'll start to see a line there, a line graph. Make a few more purchases. And as you can see, then now that all these purchases are starting to show up over here. Okay. So I want to make sure that I receive my items when I load up the page. And I'm going to guarantee doing that by putting it on this function, this get call. It's going to be on the App.js. So once this page loads, we're initially going to get all of our items right here. We're going to take all of this stuff off the item selector, and it's only going to be really just a module that runs through and doesn't do anything. It's kind of a non-functional module. It's just HTML for the most part. I currently forget the name of what they call it, but there's a name for it. So within Validate User, what I find out here is that when we do a Validate User and we called this, it came up with a few issues. So what I found is, since I'm firing this off so early in our when we log in, this functionality can't wait for what we're doing with our local storage and saving our token in session storage. I'm just going to go ahead and set up our item selector so it just knows it passes through all our variables from this object. And then here, let's go ahead and remember that it's written on App.js, so it doesn't have props passing to it anymore. And now this is where we're going to have to start passing items around. And items lives within the content management system, the CMS page. It is amongst itself within this page. So we have to pass it through the CMS first and the cart page. And then from there we'll represent. So we'll have to clear all this stuff out. By moving this props, or by moving the items around, we have to make a couple adjustments with just our modules so that they know that they'll be receiving it from somewhere else. Let's clear out all the local storage. It's making things confusing. So on the CMS page, we don't need those anymore because they're going to live on App.js. This is coming in as from its mother. Basically its parent, so we have to put props for it. And we're going to have to do that many more times on this page. So everywhere it's represented, I need to put props in front of it. Clear out the local storage. And we need to make sure this, on the CMS page, we need to be able to set the items here too. So I'm going to patch the function down as well. So it knows to set this as well. And take out the local storage. We're not going to need it. Now that this is being passed down, we're going to put props in front of it. Do that with the functions. That needs to be props in front of there too. Everywhere you see it. Obviously, every single one of these is going to be identified through something the module passed down, or App.js passed down. And here's where the problem starts. Since our config is storing, it's using local storage, and obviously cart is going to be our default. So active module when we load up is cart. And the grab all items, let's go ahead and write out what it's supposed to do. It needs to set our data if it was successful. So here's the problem. This token gets saved in session storage, but it takes a split second to get there. And when I call grab all items, it's not there yet. And so we have an undefined token. So what we're going to do is we're going to write the headers within the config, within the call. So as you can see, I can pass that token directly into grab all items function. And we're going to cut through all this. Validate user is just going to pass that token directly, and before it gets saved, I'm going to write config in here instead of relying on my session storage. And we're going to beat that race. So now it's going to get it, and session storage is going to be replaced with the token variable. There we go. Here's all our purchases. It looks like our log is working. Now we need to clear up, make sure that items are always going to be coming in correctly. It's not working 100%. It was still relying on local storage, and it looks like it's not 100% cleared out yet. So let's delete all that. We don't want populate fields to be relying on that. We need it to be relying on something we pass down. No longer we're calling out local storage. Obviously, this props is something you're going to put in with this one page is a class as opposed to hooks. It's a class module, so a little bit different with the binding. Here's one with multiple days put together on our menu, and the more days you have, the more of a actual graph it'll look like. Let's do a few more purchases. Yep, they are showing up. There's the ones we just did. Let's go to the analytics. Okay. And we're missing it out there. Let's clear out the local storage on this page. Local storage is empty here. Let's clear out all the local storage. See how we do. Purchase log is working. Looks like we're getting our data for our analytics. I don't see it in the local storage area anymore, and everything's still working except for this page. And I think this is needs to be just passed over the items. Item selector needs to have this passed in, obviously, since we aren't asking for it once we get there. Okay. Now let's just clear out some of this old stuff. That's from the very beginning. Let's get all the local storage out. It's just useless now that it's not a prototype anymore. And we are coming to a close of this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Feel free to use the code and build onto it as much as you can. I'd love to see what projects you guys take and create with something we started here. And best of luck to you.